Mandelbrot set exploration goes back to the 1980s, but there was a big leap in the mid-2010s with improved algorithms that allowed deeper zooms to be calculated with much less computational effort. The Mandelbrot set is probably the world's most famous fractal. Fractals are shapes with detail at all scales. The Mandelbrot set contains smaller copies of the whole. On the way past one baby copy towards another deeper one, embedded Julia sets appear. Changing the zoom focus to a different baby Mandelbrot copy. History repeats, then again wrapped around the origin twice and proceeding twice as fast. When the zoom gets to the first echo, the original pattern is doubled. Choosing where to go off center, shapes can be sculpted. Zooming to the side of the shape eventually constructs a tree. Zoom depth of each step goes up exponentially. Deeper zooms need higher precision numbers which cost more computation. The number of iterations also goes up exponentially, compounding the cost. Making patterns out of deep Mandelbrot zooms is a computationally expensive art practice. In 2014, Caller's Fractala 2 gained a show inflection feature. This provided a real-time preview of the first echo when zooming. It was implemented by a plane transformation of the image. This information is similar to the z to z squared plus c of the Mandelbrot set iterations. The only difficulty present is that those shapes lie at ridiculous depths. Since perturbation, the patience required to perform the actual zooming exceeds the patience required to sit through the render time. Dinky Deer Set, 2014. In 2016, Color Factor 2 gained a Newton zoom feature. This uses numerical methods to zoom automatically towards the baby Mandelbrot set copy. One click automates the manual labour of zooming in, allowing artists to focus on pattern construction, with no risk of mistakes like not zooming far enough between decision points. The core of the algorithm is Newton's root finding method, with a first step to determine the period of the baby Mandelbrot set. The period is how many iterations it takes to return to the start. And a final step to calculate its size, which also determines the size of the echo. The first echo is halfway towards the baby Mandelbrot set. Each later echo is another halfway again. First echoes are normally used because they have only twofold rotational symmetry. Symmetry doubles at each echo. In this example, the tree is refined rapidly, with the actions of the artist all semantically relevant, with much less boring zooming work. Just contort the set to produce whatever feature you want to create, then render just that, rather than brute force the pattern by relentless zooming. Stardust Forever, 2014. Mandelbrot zoom in unattainable Julia's morphing, simulation with ultrafractal. Fractal Universe 2015 on YouTube. In 2015, Fractal Universe published a video simulating Julia morphing in exceedingly deep Mandelbrot zooms. The commercial software Ultrafractal was programmed with a sequence of plane transformations, simulating the inflection transformation of zooming to an embedded Julia set echo in the Mandelbrot set. Unfortunately, it's a little hard to use. It could be as easy as a single click, add Julia transformation centered at the pixel clicked at, but it doesn't look like that's possible, so it takes many clicks to perform a morphing. Dinky Dow Set, 2017. Inflected Gadget is a tool to make inflected Julia sets quick and fun. On opening the program, an image of the Mandelbrot set is shown. The first task is to select a point whose Julia set is then shown. This choice determines the character of the filaments making up the final image. Choosing a point in a baby Mandelbrot set means the Julia set will have solid nodes. Using solid nodes gives a kind of quantum inflected Julia set with the shape determined by counting spiral branches. There are minor variations to the click position in each individual node. These can be ironed out by enabling quantization, which snaps each click position to the exact node center. The familiar tree can be constructed by clicking to the side in a regular way. A refined image can take very little time to construct. This manual labour is now in choosing inflection points in a repetitive way to create a regular pattern. The tree constructed previously had dynamics with just one branch. This corresponds to a point in the main cardioid of the Mandelbrot set, which has period 1. The dynamics of the initial Julia set, the baby Mandelbrot set has period much greater than 1, were subverted by the later choices of inflection points which force period 1 behaviour. Now consider period 2 behaviour, again with a baby Mandelbrot set with period greater than 2. This Julia set has period 2-like dynamics because it is near the period 2 disk in the Mandelbrot set. This is achieved by a period 1-like choice of inflection points, but localized within the shortest branch of the period 2-like dynamics. Construction of the tree in the shortest arm ripples out through the inflected Julia set, with less refined copies of the tree spreading to its edges. This led to the coining of the name evolution by Dinky-Dow set, as a history of the development of the shape is visible. There are simply 2 rows of shapes which can be manipulated separately. Even better, this can be extended to more than just 2. Dinky-Dow set 2014. The rotation of the branches by the Julia set dynamics means that the pattern from period many steps ago returns to the focus in the shortest branch ready for the next refinement step. The initial steps are the hardest, but once the start of the pattern has been constructed, each next step follows easily from the shapes that have returned to their focal area. In this example, trees and discs are constructed with period 2. Each time the disc returns to the focus is expanded with a click to its centre. Each time the tree returns to the focus it is refined with a click to its side. The final image contains trees and discs interleaved, enveloped by a Basilica Julia set. In a similar way, 3 period 1 shapes could be constructed in a rabbit period 3 Julia set. The building blocks are not limited to period 1, they can be period 2 or higher evolutions themselves. The increased complexity of the patterns of inflection point provides the challenge. The artist must remember the sequence of inflections to carry out the next step, with the shape of the fractal providing hints only in later stages. Inflected Julia sets can be analysed using the theory of external angles. Imagine the fractal is electrically charged inside a circle at infinity with opposite charge. Then the curves of equal potential form concentric rings around the shape, and perpendicular field lines extend from the shape to infinity. These external rays reach infinity at their external angle. External angles are measured in turns and expressed as binary expansions. These expansions of interest are pre-periodic with a prefix followed by a repeating block. External angles are an alternative description of nodes in quantum inflected Julia sets, one that is much more informative than the complex number coordinates. In Inflected Gadget, external angles can be printed to the terminal by pressing the X key. Once all the rays have been traced, the next step is making sense of it. The printed Brit strings represent pre-periodic sequences, so the first task is to identify the periodic tail written in parentheses. The initial baby Mandelbrot set in this example has period 5, so the blocks of repeating digits will also have length 5. Each pair of rays shares the same structure. Guessing that patterns of construction are mirrored in patterns of ray structure, one sees that the alternation of trees and discs leads to alternation of 2 distinct structures. The spaces added in the prefix are to elucidate the structure but don't affect the numerical value. Each structure increases in length as more inflection points are added, but unlike external angles in the Mandelbrot set, the increase in length is linear, not exponential. The end goal of this analysis is extrapolation and resynthesis. Deduce the pattern of inflection points in terms of patterns of external angles. Then describe this pattern as an algorithm and run it to extend the pattern as far as desired. Finally, turning the sequence of external angles back into a sequence of inflection points. So from a few rounds of development, perhaps 3 or 4 steps of each sub-pattern, a highly refined image can be generated without having to click so many times by hand. In addition to the external angle, one needs a number of iterations for the node to reach the origin. Inflected gadget prints this number when adding a new inflection point if quantization mode is active. Once all the data has been collected, you end up with a table like this, showing the external angles and the iterations for each shape. Then the process of synthesis proceeds as follows. First, you analyze the external angles of the construction, then code the analysis as an algorithm, use the algorithm to extrapolate further external angles, then somehow translate the external angles into inflection points, and then you end up with a finely resolved final image. So the table presented earlier can be expressed as an algorithm in the language Haskell based on string concatenation. Start with the initial location in the Mandelbrot set, then alternate between trees and disks, which are made up of concatenations in different ways. They take an argument which is an integer from 1 going upwards, and that's the depth of the procedure. So you end up with an infinite list of trees, disks, alternating, and you can take as many of that as you need because Haskell is a lazy language. So there's somehow to translate inflection points from external rays. So for the initial Mandelbrot set, you can trace the external ray in the Mandelbrot set and then use Newton-Raphson method to find the mini-Brot center and add the initial Julia seed there. And then for each successive step, you can trace the external ray in the inflected Julia set and use Newton-Raphson to find the node center and add the inflection point there. So the end goal is some kind of automation. So the artist performs a few rounds of development of the desired shape and activates a button to extrapolate it to a finely resolved structure. So how do we get there? The steps on the previous slide should be straightforward to automate apart from step 0, which is analyzing external angles into pre-periodic parts, which is hard but should be possible. And step 1, which is coding the analysis and algorithm, which is pretty much an open research problem. Another reason to use inflected Julia sets instead of Mandelbrot zooming is efficiency. The external angle length in Mandelbrot set goes up exponentially, as does the iteration count, which means that you can only do a few steps before you run out of time. So the external angle length in inflected Julia sets goes up linearly, but you do have to trace all of them. But altogether, tracing the rays takes less time for inflected Julia sets. For Mandelbrot set, it works out as 4 to the power n, where n is the number of steps, whereas for inflected Julia sets, it's n cubed. And that's a big difference, because if you've got 10 steps, then 4 to the 10 is about a million. 10 cubed is only 1,000. So 4 to the 20 is about a million, whereas 20 cubed is about 8,000. So that includes the video part of this presentation. You can visit the paper homepage at matha.co.uk/inflect, or you can email me at claude@matha.co.uk. Thanks. Are there any questions?
Yeah, any questions for Claude? Anyone on the higher left level with Claude to be able to ask a question? Your microphone is creating a bit of interference. Now the interference is gone, but I can't hear you at all. Or maybe...
Hello?
Yeah, that seems to be better.
Okay.
Are there any questions from Berlin or online? Can't see any popping up. We are still, unfortunately, behind schedule. So unless anyone's got a quick one. Right. Let's see. There's Berlin. Yeah, I think they're all happy. Okay, so yeah, so thanks very much, Claude. Let's give you a quick round of applause.
Okay.